Okay, I think we'll get started. I'm sure some people are struggling through the rain in order to get here, so we'll just let them trickle in, no pun intended. My name's Wendy Fenton, and I'm the coordinator of the Humanitarian Practice Network here at the Humanitarian Policy Group within ODI. And I'd like to welcome you to the launch of the 50th edition of the Humanitarian Exchange magazine. And this edition, the 50th edition, is focused on humanitarian partnerships. We've also got, in addition to those of you who are here, people watching online. I'm not sure how many people are there, but we've got people there, and they may also have questions and comments later in the session. We've got a number of speakers here today who I'm going to introduce in just a moment, but at first I'd like to thank my co-editor for this issue, Rachel Houghton, who couldn't be with us today because she's ill. Because she made a huge contribution to putting this issue out, to identifying people to write articles, and her support and her insights were very much appreciated. And I know that she would like to, if she were here, because we were planning to have her speak as well, that she'd like to highlight a couple of important issues. The first one being that partnerships are about relationships. And these relationships are ideally built on trust and equity and mutual accountability. Also that humanitarian partnerships, which we're going to be talking about today, that we're looking at those more carefully now because we need to find ways, new ways of working effectively together to find solutions to these complex humanitarian problems that we face. And then finally, that there is a real need to better capture and apply the learning from partnership working. And we hope that you'll find the Humanitarian Exchange Edition 50 a contribution to that. So I don't want to spend too much more time myself talking. I want to give the maximum time to our speakers as well as to you to initiate the discussion. But I wanted to tell you how this session will work. We're going to give each speaker about 15 minutes. We've got two presenters who I'll introduce in a minute and two discussants. So that session will be about an hour. Then we'll have 30 minutes for discussion, questions, comments, discussion with you and with our online participants. And the last 30 minutes of our 2-hour session will be devoted to the most fun part, which is networking over refreshments in the next room. So I hope you'll be able to stay for that. And maybe the rain will work to our advantage that way and that you won't feel like going out in it anyway. So let me now introduce our speakers. To my far right is Sean Lowrie, our first speaker. He's the director of the Consortium of British Humanitarian Agencies, more commonly known as the CBHA. And he's also an author of one of the articles in the issue, which is on the CBA. It's entitled the Consortium of British Humanitarian Agencies, a new initiative for NGO collaboration. Sean has more than 20 years of experience in the humanitarian sector. In 1999, he moved to the UK to develop and roll out the training and dissemination program of the Sphere project. And he then went on to work as an independent consultant in organizational learning, strategy, and change. Sean's thinking about partnership and collaboration, and he's had a lot of experience in this, has been informed by assignments with a number of organizations, including the Steering Committee for Humanitarian Response, ICVA, OCHA, FAO, a whole bunch of acronyms actually, and UNESCO, the Prevention Consortium, the Good Humanitarian Donorship Initiative, and 2 years of action research at King's College London with the Humanitarian Futures Program. So without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Sean. He's going to talk, I think he's going to base his talk partly on his article, and I know he's got a number of other observations to make. Sean.
Thanks, Wendy. And I'll try and keep it to 15 minutes. It's a long story, and the story begins like this. A couple of years ago, some of the directors of the humanitarian NGOs in London began to meet because they missed the dialogue that they had back in the late 90s around humanitarian issues. When the Sphere project was coming out, the NGO directors used to get together and talk about humanitarian issues, and that had fallen away somehow. And they did a study commissioned by the BOAG group, it's the 5 big NGOs in town, and they looked at where DFID's funding was going and discovered that since the advent of humanitarian reform, more money was going to the UN and less money was going to NGOs. So there was a couple of problems here. Then DFID came out with a call for proposals. And the call for proposals was about capacity building for emergency response. Well, these emergency directors said, this is the opportunity we've been waiting for. They pulled together a rapid consortium of 15 organizations called the CBHA, put in a proposal, and won the bid. They got 2 years of funding worth £8 million from Diff and a memorandum of understanding. The goal is to strengthen the so-called third pillar of humanitarian response so that we have 3 equal, strong, performing pillars: the UN, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, and civil society. That's the goal. How do we do this? We work in 5 main areas. Half of our budget is for a fund, a rapid response fund, where we give out grants up to £200,000 within 72 hours of a rapid onset crisis. It's a bit esoteric, as all this discussion about partnerships is, because we work in organizational systems. The first is financing systems. The second is scaling up and surge capacity. Each of the 15 organizations in the consortium is taking a different approach to improving their ability to scale up to surprising and large-scale events. The third is staff capacity building. We're working on core competencies to get agreement between 15 organizations about what it actually means to be a humanitarian worker. What are the core competencies required? And then developing 2 training programs, one that brings in external talent into the sector, leadership talent, giving them a 1-year apprenticeship program. So you get somebody from corporate world to come in and work as an apprentice in an NGO for a year, and they learn how to do humanitarian work, and then they can get a proper job. We also have a national staff development program that's rolling out in 4 countries, and that will be available to the wider sector at the end of the second year. We're also working in technology and innovation, using open source software for supply chain logistics, and finally learning from the process of collaboration. So these are the 5 organizational systems that the CBHA is working in. Now, what are the principles that we're applying? We're making it up as we go along. These are humanitarian directors, operational people, and they don't come from a partnership specialty so much. They come from a practical perspective, and these are the kind of working principles that we're figuring out as we go along in the consortium. Number 1, diversity. It's important to have a big consortium of diverse members. We feel that represents better the dynamics in the humanitarian system. So we have big and small agencies, partnership, direct implementing, faith-based, secular, risk-averse, risk-embracing organizations. We have a very diverse, big, unwieldy consortium of 15 organizations. But everybody has to say one vote. There's a principle of equality here. So when we make decisions, it doesn't matter how big and powerful your organization is or how small and niche market it is, everybody has one vote. We allocate funds according to peer review. This is the world's only donor peer review mechanism. So when we announce a crisis and organizations put the proposals on the table, peer organizations read the proposals and evaluate whether we should invest in that project. We also peer review their reports at the end for accountability and learning purposes. Subsidiarity, we try and push decision-making down to the lowest level in the network possible. When you think about the 15 organizations, there are 3,000 members in this network of organizations. The CBHA is quite a well-connected node, if you like, in the network of the humanitarian system. And finally, pragmatic. It's a very pragmatic consortium. These are operational people. This is a means to an end. We're not collaborating because we're nice people and we like to hug each other. We're collaborating because this is a means to an end. So we were carrying, our work started in March last year, and we were carrying on. We got the consortium set up, and we got some things going, and then Pakistan happened. Then the Pakistan flood happened. We were the fastest British mechanism to get money out the door within 3 days. And so when Andrew Mitchell stood up in Parliament and he was asked a question, what are the British people doing about the Pakistan floods, the only result he could report on was the work of the British charities. After a couple of weeks, Diff had said, hey, you guys are doing a good job. Could you handle another £1 million? We said yes. It wasn't in our existing program of work, but we saw that the scale was bigger or the needs were greater than so we took the money and we did the work. We did matching grants, so it was actually a £2 million program. Then, another month later, we got a call from DFID. They said, would you take £20 million for early recovery work? There are a lot of people in the rural areas of Pakistan whose livelihoods have been destroyed, and we need the capacity of civil society to program cash in these rural areas and help restore livelihoods. And this was a crisis for the consortium. It really pushed us to the limit of our agreements. We had to go to the chief executives. There was 2 weeks of tension. We went to a vote. It was split. But in the end, we decided based on one thing. And that was, I went to Diff and I said, listen, Diff, what do you want to do with this consortium of NGOs? Where do you want this to go? And they said, we don't have an opinion yet. We need evidence to base our opinion. So I took that back to the consortium and I said, Diffit doesn't know what they want to do with us yet because they don't have any evidence on our performance. So let's take this money, let's show them what civil society can do. So we took the money. And we formed, me and my team and another consultant went down and we brokered an ad hoc consortium of 6 organizations over 5 days. Formed a 6-agency consortium and signed the contract with Diffit, and they're doing this work right now. A couple of other unanticipated opportunities came up over the course of the first year of the CBHA. When Valerie Amos took office, she gave us a call and she said, I would like to talk with chief executives of NGOs. Would you broker that for us? We said, sure. Then Patty Ashdown and Ross Mountain and co. from the Humanitarian Response Review said, we need to deal with civil society, but there's too many of you. Can you broker our dialogue with them? We said, sure. So we brokered several workshops and we put together several formal papers to her that contributed to the recommendations of the final report. Here's the evidence on our performance over the past year. We are Diffit's fastest disbursement mechanism. We've distributed £3.8 million in 8 different emergency contexts using the world's only peer-reviewed donor mechanism, which selected 38 projects out of 52 applicants, helping 755,000 people. In Pakistan, we programmed £16 million in 6 months, and we helped 700,000 people. We agreed a core competence framework between 15 organizations, and we have developed 2 capacity-building programs that will be freely available to the entire humanitarian sector. That is value for money. But you know what? This is tough. Collaboration is really, really hard. You know, we do it because we know that NGOs need to work together, but this is really tough. The transaction costs, so to speak, are quite high. You know, we have board meetings once a month for 3 hours by the humanitarian directors, subcommittee meetings, emails. It's a lot of work, and people complain and grumble all the time. My colleague Marika Hounjet there is the coordinator of the CBHA. She's very good at apologetically asking people to contribute things, but everybody's still there at the table. Well, at least the boundary spanners are there at the table. The individuals who work across the table in the consortium are there because they know that we have to work together. Several tensions have emerged in our consortium experiment. The first is strategy. Should we have an emergent or predictable strategy? The big bureaucracies, the big NGOs want something predictable. They want to know what the CBHA is, and they want to be able to plan. Although we live in a turbulent world and things are uncertain, other organizations realize that we have to adapt as things go on. You know, if we had a predictable strategy, then we wouldn't have responded to the Pakistan floods. We wouldn't have brokered Valerie Amos's meeting, and we wouldn't have given any input to the HER. Trust is a second one that we struggle with. Should it be a direct, explicit objective, or should it be an indirect byproduct of other things that we do? If you start talking about trust directly, you can be held over a barrel. Oh, I don't trust you because you're not doing what I want. Procedures. Should our procedures be formal or informal? Some bureaucrats like formal procedures. Other people realize this is about relationships, and we need to have a minimum amount of procedure and formality. Momentum. Should we have incremental experiments, or should we have a consortium that lurches from phase transition to phase transition? But we're doing it because we believe and agree with Patty Ashdown when he said that the needs are greater than the resources right now in the humanitarian sector, and more is coming. We realize as practitioners that Haiti and Pakistan were not aberrations. They're signs of things to come, and the sector needs to get bigger and better and faster. Thank God we have support from Diffit. Thank God they gave us £8 million for 2 years to keep the NGOs together. Because although the boundary spanners who sit around the table believe in collaboration, although they are the directors of operational departments in multi-mandate organizations, their organizations are huge, with thousands of employees, millions of pounds of budget, and they have other interests. And what keeps the NGOs at the table is money from Diffit. And then Wednesday happened. I don't know whether you know what happened last Wednesday or not, but Diff had announced its response to the HER. The HER was Lord Ashdown's review of Diff humanitarian policy. Of the 67 recommendations in the HER, 85% were accepted, which is, I think, a feather in the cap of Lord Ashdown and his team, that it was an excellent piece of work. 15% were rejected or partially rejected, including all of the recommendations about civil society. So while the UN, the Red Cross, and DFID Civil Service are going to get more funding and more predictable funding, the NGOs are going to get more competition. And we're going to compete against the commercial sector. And by the way, the CBHA MOU is not going to be renewed. So what does this mean? It means DFID sees partnership as subcontracting, not as a relationship. Now, are you thinking what I'm thinking? What? I don't understand. I don't understand. What do I need to do to take my shoe off the table and thump it on it? This is wrong. This is wrong. You know, this morning I woke up and I thought to myself, this is a bit like, you know, the soldiers in the trenches in World War I about to go over the top in Passchendaele. And Field Marshal Haig, after a good meal of foie gras and cognac, says, chaps, I have a great idea. I know the challenges are going to be great there tomorrow when you get up in front of the machine guns, but I've got a great idea that's going to improve your capacity. We're going to get you to wrestle for your guns. And only the strongest ones are going to get a gun to go over the top. Oh, by the way, we're going to get a few shopkeepers and throw them into the trenches too and have them wrestle with you for your guns as well. But if anybody from DFID is here, or if anybody from DFID is watching online, if anybody's listening, you know, NGOs aren't going to go on strike. You know, I mean, don't be afraid of the NGOs going on strike. In fact, if this is about competition, bring it on. The NGOs are ready to compete on the same criteria for selection. Let's have fair competition. If you're going to put competition into the humanitarian system, let's make it fair. The NGOs against the Red Cross, the NGOs against the UN, the NGOs against the commercial sector, the NGOs against the military, on fair terms. The same criteria for selection, the same overhead rates, the same reporting requirements, and the same standards of performance. Because this is about value for money, and value for money means achieving the sphere standards, not the indicators, the standards. And these standards have come from years of experience. So the NGOs are the workers. We know what we're doing, and we've produced these standards that say what value for money means. So we're ready for competition. Bring it on, but bring it on fairly. But my final message, Wendy, I don't know whether I'm 15 minutes or not, but the final message is that British NGOs are going to work together. We're going to collaborate, whether we get funding from DFID or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.